Slide switches here. Alrighty, let's I guess we'll get started here. Welcome to SOC 315, which is Intro to Social Methods. Alright, hopefully you're in the right place. I had to double check. So for those of you who don't know me, I don't actually see a ton of familiar faces, a few. Obviously, my name is Jeff Broussard. I'm a professor, an instructor, I guess, here in the Department of Sociology. If you're looking for me on any given day, my office is just down that way in the Center for Criminological Research in 1-062. I'm Office D. I teach a whole bunch of stuff in the department, everything from intro soc all the way through youth and religion and a bunch of methods classes. And I think I've taught like 9 classes in the department. If you're trying to get a hold of me, best way is through email. Both those emails go to the same inbox. I don't have set office hours, but we can do by appointment, and I'm here a lot of the time, like probably 4 days a week on campus, and Thursday mornings most of the time. So yeah, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and then I guess Tuesday as well, and Thursday. So that's me. I want to introduce you to Joe. Would you want to stand up, Joe? Joe is going to be the TA for the class. So he is going to be leading you through the labs, right? Joe is a PhD student here. Are you PhD candidate or student? Student, all right. So a PhD student in the department here. He has TA'd for me before in this class, and he does a fabulous job at it. I think we have 6 labs scheduled for the whole semester. If you look at the syllabus, it's got the dates on there. I may shift those around depending on how quickly we're moving through the material. I might delay one as long as it works with Joe's schedule. So yeah, he'll be leading you through, and I think they're both on Tuesday, right? One is at 9 a.m. and the other one is at 3:30, is it?
3:40.
Yeah, okay. So, if for any reason, the one that you have scheduled on Bear Tracks, right, you're scheduled at 9 a.m., but that day you can't make it and you want to go to the 3:30 one, it's in the same room. Feel free to go to that one as well, right? There's no problem with that at all. We're not keeping attendance either in the labs, and Joe will basically lead you through a couple of activities just to kind of build up your skills with regards to methods. Did you want to say anything else, Joe, about yourself?
Me? I'm Joe. I have a weird, long, full name, Chinese name, so you can just call me Joe. And I came from Hong Kong. I'm a PhD student here, and my own research interests are about youth and delinquency. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. You don't have to stick around if you don't.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, you could take off whenever you need. No, I just wanted to introduce you. And he's gonna. Not starting tomorrow. There's no lab tomorrow, right? The labs are going to start next Tuesday because we haven't gone through any material, so there's no point in getting you through anything right away. I don't know. Okay. Any questions? Anything you want to know? Just feel free to shoot up a hand. Sometimes in my bigger classes, I have like an online question thing. I don't have it here because we're a small class, and obviously they stuck us in a sardine box of a room. You know, like get nice and cozy and warm with all your neighbors. So just shoot up your hand or pipe up if you have a question. Okay, so the textbook for this class is Bell, Breiman, and Kleinknecht. Looks like a German name. Social Research Methods from Oxford. It's a nice little textbook. It's not overly expensive, and it does a pretty good job of kind of covering the material. Now, the question people usually want to know about the textbook is, can you use older editions of the textbook? Absolutely, right? Like, I've looked through the 4th, 5th, and obviously this is the 6th edition. There's not, like, methods doesn't change a whole lot, right? How we do research has some innovations, but it's pretty consistent. So if you find an older textbook, go ahead. One of the big differences between the newer textbooks and the older ones is they try to update the examples a little bit in some cases. So the examples they use might be less contemporary if you go with like the 4th edition, which I want to say is now like 15 years old. So it might not be quite as up to date, but certainly if you find an older edition, you will do fine. And I'm not going to tell you to pirate things, but I know Library Genesis has the American edition of this textbook on it, and it's substantively similar, but all the examples are American rather than Canadian. So if you end up using that, and you want to have a copy of the textbook but not pay, whatever Oxford wants for it, again, Research Methods is pretty standard across the board. So I think you'd be fine doing that. Okay. I guess the other question I always get with textbooks is, do I need to buy the textbook? Generally, I think of textbooks as supplemental to the course, right? It's like, I'm not going to go and deep dive into the textbook to find an obscure thing that I didn't talk about in class, to build a multiple choice question or short answer question around to really mess you up so I can lower the class average or whatever the logic is. Everything that's on the test, like the midterm and the final, I'm going to have covered in the lectures. So I think like the textbook can be a good way of getting further explanation of that, or if my explanation isn't working for you, going to the textbook can be a good option. But do you absolutely need to buy it? I would say that's up to you. It depends on, are you the kind of person that finds textbooks helpful? If you find textbooks helpful, buy the textbook. If you don't find them helpful and they end up just decorating your shelf and you plan to, one day when you move out of your parents' house or, move to the Caribbean or something, that's when you plan to throw it out, I'd say save yourself the step and don't do that. And again, there's lots of digital copies floating online of things very similar to this. Okay, any questions? No? Okay. So the evaluations in this class I don't think they're overly complex, but basically there's 2 exams, 2 longer assignments, and then 6 short assignments. Okay, so I'll go through them here in turn. Midterms are pretty straightforward, right? You've got a midterm on February 26th, 30 multiple choice questions, 4 short answer questions. Of those 4 short answer questions, 2 are kind of information, right? So it's like terms, and 2 of them are application, right? So it'll be like 2 where you have to define something or contrast 2 definitions, say what the difference between 2 things are, and then 2 of them is going to be related to the skills that you're going to be practicing both in the labs with Joe, in the mini lab assignments, and then that you're going to be writing up for the major lab. So things like writing survey questions, right? Writing research questions, this kind of thing that we're going to be working through in the class. So they're pretty, basically 2 of them are going to be those application questions. 2 short answer questions are definitional. So pretty straightforward. The final exam is exactly the same, 30 multiple choice questions, 4 short answer questions. They're basically non-cumulative. The first one, like the midterm, is going to deal with quantitative research, and the final exam is going to deal with qualitative research, right? So basically the course is half split between quantitative and qualitative, and each exam covers one of those. What I call the major lab assignments, basically I think at the beginning, the first one's due at the beginning of March, and that's your quantitative kind of research. It's basically a research proposal. So it's like a quantitative research proposal. All the materials are on eClass. So if you want to take a look at them, like everything's laid out in terms of what you need to do for it. But basically you'll be writing up a research proposal for some kind of quantitative research. And the second one, due basically the last day of the semester, is the same thing, but for qualitative research, right? So you basically are going to do one and the other through the class. Now, the 6, what I call mini lab assignments, are basically kind of spread throughout the term. They're really, really, really straightforward. Basically, you're going to do some work with Joe in the lab, and then you'll kind of work together in groups. Say come up with survey questions. Joe's going to give you some feedback on how you could write better survey questions or better interview questions or better research questions as a kind of group. And then you're going to write up, individually, kind of say, I think it's for the second mini lab is survey questions. Then myself and Joe are going to go through and kind of critique your individual research questions that are going to be related to, sorry, I should have said this first. Your kind of research question that you're building for your major lab assignment. The idea of the mini lab, like the 3 first mini labs, is to build towards your first major lab, and the last 4, 5, 6 mini labs are meant to build towards your second major lab. So basically you're going to be, developing some initial, say, research question. We'll critique it and you can refine it. And then you're going to develop like survey questions. We'll critique it, you can refine them. And you can reuse all of that to build your major lab, so that by the time you get to the major lab, you should have a pretty refined kind of looking project. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? Basically, you can reuse everything from those mini labs on the major lab and just expand them a little bit and refine them. So you don't have to do the work 2-3 times. The mini labs are essentially, if you submit it, you get a grade, right? If you submit it, you get 1.6% of your grade. If you don't submit it, you don't get that. They're not even really pass fail. They're do don't do, right? So if you do them, you're going to get your I don't know. I think it comes out to 10%. Yeah, it comes out to about 10%. So strongly advise, do them. I just finished teaching this class in the fall semester. There are a few people who didn't do half of them, and then they're like, oh, my grade is 4% short of what I was hoping for. And it's like, you didn't submit that amount. So do them, right? They're really easy. They don't take long. Yeah, please.
Are we going to have feedback on the new website?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so every time you submit one, either myself or Joe and I are going to go through them, and we'll be like, okay, here's your research question. You phrased it in more of a qualitative way, so you need to rephrase this in more of a quantitative or whatever, right? Or I don't think your project is going to work for this, that, and the other reason. Sometimes, you'll have survey questions. Maybe I could get into details about survey questions. I'm going to hold off on that. But I'll tell you, okay, this one doesn't work for the following reasons, right? But yeah, every single one gets feedback. Yeah, so the idea is I give you a ton of feedback, and hopefully you ace the major labs because you know what you're doing at this point. It's the second time you've gotten to try it, or third, I guess if you count what you're doing in the lab with Joe. Any other questions? That's basically the assignments, right? I think they're pretty straightforward. Like if you want to look at the descriptions of the major labs and the mini labs, they're all on eClass already. So you can go through them and take a look. I imported them from last semester and just kind of changed the dates on them. So they're there. The rubrics are there, so you can be thinking, do take a look at the rubrics, because you can kind of be thinking through, how is it going to be graded? Like, what are the criteria? Everything, any supporting materials you need are all already on there, so you can start looking at it. It's not due till March, but you can start looking at it today. It feels like, do I want to start looking at my assignment in March and January? But it doesn't hurt, right? So it's all there on day one, ready for you to take a look at. Any questions about the assignments? I know it's early days and you're all barely back from holidays and I'm just pummeling you with information, but it must be done. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. Alrighty. Yeah, I guess I said this already. I get ahead of myself sometimes. The exams are not cumulative, right? So basically the first part is quantitative, the second part is qualitative, and you won't have a ton of overlapping kind of information between the two. So it's pretty cleanly separated, even though methodologically I don't know if you can separate qual and quant that easily. The course is separated into quantitative and qualitative very, very clearly. And it should be, pretty easy to understand what is going on. All right, I already said most of the rest of that. So what's the purpose of the course, right? Basically to introduce you to a bunch of different kind of research methodologies, right? And how basically sociologists do research, right? And it's about building some skills too, which is I think where this class at times is a little bit more challenging than some of the more kind of, how shall I say it? Learn information, regurgitate information kind of sociology classes you might have done in the past. There's actually kind of skills that you'll be building here, right? Things that like writing research questions, writing survey questions, creating an interview guide, and those, lots of other stuff as well. All of those kinds of things that are a little bit, I think, where people I think find this course challenging sometimes is that it's like not just about regurgitating information, it's about actually applying some of that information on assignments. It can be really fun, right? Creating surveys is super fun, and we'll walk through with you and make fun of some really bad survey questions, and interview questions and all sorts of mistakes that people make. I got a million stories about, people doing research and it going horribly wrong. Stories to guide you if you ever decide to do research. But yeah, that's basically what it is. Looking at a bunch of different quantitative and qualitative research methodologies, and just trying to sort of get you thinking about what it might look like to do research if that's something you decide to do, right? One of my TAs, not Joe, someone who is meaner than him, suggested that this is like all I do is give like the trailers of each social methodology, right? So it's like, okay, now we're going to watch the trailer for this kind of way of doing research, but it's meant to give you a sense of how many different kinds of research you could do, especially when we get into the qualitative side. It might feel a little bit rapid fire because there's a lot of qualitative methods, but you'll have a sense of what kind of research you could do at the end of the day. Oh, I left that in from when I taught this class online. I really should take that out. It's not obviously an asynchronous class. I am, however, recording all of the lectures, right? And they all go up on YouTube. And basically, I will put a link on the eClass page to a playlist where I stick all of those recordings. So if you miss a class, right, don't worry about it. That recording will be on there at some point. You can go and take a look at it. If you are sick, you don't need to come. You don't need to get us all sick, or worry that you're missing material. You can just catch up, or you can even watch the class live on YouTube. It is right there, and you can actually, participate. Trying to think what else, if there's anything else about that. Yeah, so basically, you don't have to worry about missing material. It's all going to be there at the end of the day. If I forget to upload or link a lecture back to the playlist, just let me know and I'll throw it in there. But yeah, you don't have to worry about missing class ever because it's all going to be there for you to go find later. Now, I will say this, don't take that to mean that 2 days before the exam, you can run through all of the material before the first midterm, because that isn't going to work. I've seen people try and it doesn't go well. More in SOS 100, but definitely try to keep up with the material, even if, you're not coming to class and you're keeping up online. My voice sounds terrible at 1.5, but whatever. Or 2 sounds even worse. But do whatever works for you, right? I'm trying to empower you to do well. Yeah, I really want you all to do well in this class, and I know it's not the most, let's not pretend, it's maybe not the most exciting topic, and you probably weren't like, yeah, finally this semester I get to take social methodology. I'm so stoked. But I really am going to try to make it as fun and interesting as humanly possible. Try to get us through this course so that you're not, you enjoy it as much as you can enjoy Intro to Social Methods as a course, right? Have some fun. Try and give you some knowledge and some skills coming out of this, and hopefully you kind of enjoy it at the end of the day. If there's something you need me to do that I'm not doing, just let me know, and I will do my absolute best to make modifications to how I'm teaching, as long as it's within reason, right? It's like, can we all just have an A and never meet again? Can't do that. But I'll do my very best to kind of modify things as much as possible. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to say. Oh, I do want you all to do well too. So if you have questions, right? If you're struggling with how to put together the major labs, right? And you're like, I don't know how to do this. This is frustrating me. Come talk to me, right? Come to my office. Sometimes students are like, oh, I'm bothering you. And it's my job to teach you this, and I'm happy to do it. If we have to meet 2, 3, 4 times until you're feeling confident in your assignments, make 2, 3, 4 appointments, right? I've had students do that in the past, and I had to tell one student to stop apologizing for using up my time. I'm like, be quiet, just let's work on this. You don't have to apologize for using my time. I'm here to teach this topic, and unlike a lot of other the professors here, I'm on a teaching contract. I don't have research, so I'm here to teach, right? And I'm happy to give you as much attention as you need so that you get the grade in this class that you want, to the best of my and your abilities. That doesn't mean everybody gets an A. Some people don't care, right? For some people, C is for cookie, and that's good enough, right? But if you want an A, I want to help you get that A. If you want a B, I want to help you get that B, and all of that kind of stuff. And that's sort of where I'm at. Okay. Any questions? Because we're only 21 minutes in. Yeah, please.
Not related to the feedback portion, and I might have missed it, but did you want us to come in for the midterm and the final? Because I'll see that they're online.
So, that's a very good question. So I am doing them through eClass because of many reasons, among which the fact is that the printing, to get stuff printed at U of A is a complete catastrophe. I'm not even kidding. I didn't print anything last semester because I gave up and I moved everything online. The semester before that, the winter of last year, I had exams show up where half the exams were missing. And so I'm always pretty organized. So it was 3 days before, but then I had to emergency print stuff. And I'm like, this is not worth the stress. So everything's on eClass. That said, yeah, you will be writing it in class on the day of those exams, just because it's closed book and it's multiple choice, and I could be really intrusive and have your camera watch all of you through SEM, and then have 20 emails of people whose Macs don't allow SEM to work or whatever. It's just easier to have you come in, write the exam in class. I'll stand at the back corner so I can spy on all your screens, and off we go to the races. But yeah, it is on eClass, which has huge benefits. You'll get the results back way faster than if I had to wait for testing services to run Scantrons through. And if you come to review it, you don't have to watch me awkwardly flip through 50 papers. So all around, this has worked out as a really good system. But yeah, and you write it on your laptop or your iPad, or probably not your phone, but whatever device you're most comfortable with. If you have accommodations, obviously you write it wherever you want, and I set you up with the extra time and all of that stuff. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Other burning questions. Other than why am I here? What terrible life choices have I made to lead me to this juncture? I ask myself this every day. Yeah, please.
So for the labs, is it for the major labs, right? So is it we have to write research proposals, or
Yeah.
just research proposals? That's it.
That is it. There are specific components of what I need you to have on it.
Okay. I'm just I was just kind of confused. That's why.
Yeah, I think there are examples on eClass already, if I am not mistaken.
Yeah.
There are, yeah. Yeah, so there are examples, and you can see kind of someone who did really well on it. It's kind of like a research proposal, but again, I want you to put specific pieces in that reflect the course content that we've taught. But yeah, it's really straightforward. It's not long, right? It's pretty, I don't know. I don't want to say simple again, because then someone's going to be like, this is so hard, and I don't feel like it's simple, but I don't think it's complicated. Yeah, please.
I'm just going to stop saying if the major labs work 1.6 or 1.7, because that 1.6 on the 1.7 on the
Whatever divides down, because 6 of them, you basically divide 6 by 10. They're worth 10% total. So I think it kind of works out awkwardly. I might have had it wrong on the slide, but because I've changed it, I used to have 8 of them. So you can thank the Department of Sociology for not providing me with a proper TA last semester, for having me cut it down by 2. But yeah, or hang on. I don't know how to do math. Yeah, it's 1.66. So 1.6, 1.7 if you round, right? But yeah, basically the 6 of them come out to 10% total. So I just total up the marks and put it out of 10% of the course rate, right? And basically you get either 0 or 10 out of 10 on it. 0 if you didn't submit it. 10 out of 10 if you did submit it. Even if you did a terrible job. Honestly, if you're in a super busy week and you're like, I don't have time to do a good job on this, that's okay. Do a terrible job because you will still get 1.6% for doing a terrible job. Now, I wouldn't recommend that as a life strategy, you know, but for the purposes of these mini labs, you know, if the choice is I'm not going to do it and lose 1.6%, or I'm going to do not my best work and get it, and you'll still get some feedback, right? So you might still learn something. I would say opt for the doing it. And they really don't take very long, right? Honestly, like, I think for one, it's like you write 5 survey questions with their response sets. It's really not, like, they're not crazy. They will not take you a massive amount of time, unless, I mean, some people do, because some people are perfectionists and they'll spend 2 hours on it, but I don't think you need to spend that much time on it. So, yeah, please.
Is it structured so like you can do the mini labs in the lab class period, or and then like the major ones sort of on your own time, or is it sort of like we go, we listen, and then everything is homework?
So basically, the way I have it set up, and Joe may modify it because I've got kind of a general plan, and then he has, you know, if he wants to change things, is you kind of do something similar to the mini lab, but you do it kind of as a group. So instead of you just kind of thinking it through on your own, you do it kind of as a group activity, so you can kind of pool your brain power and try it out the first time, you know, debrief, get some feedback, and then you go home and you put together your mini lab. Now, generally, the labs don't take the full, was that hour and a half? Is it hour and a half or 2 hours that they're scheduled for?
Almost hour and a half.
Yeah, so it doesn't, they usually take like an hour, maybe a little more. So there may still be time for you to work on them in that period. And yet you only have them scheduled every other week too. So, but yeah, they're generally the mini lab portion is homework afterwards. Oh, I should say, there's no stats in this class. I was saving the best for last. We're not gonna, I could run stats, you know, and run you through stuff. I figure you all had to take a stats class in order to be here. And what I could teach you about stats in 2 weeks is significantly less than what you've learned in those classes. So rather than making us go through this again or having you play with data sets, you know, you can go, once you're done with this, you can go take advanced qual methods or advanced stats if you want. There's good reasons you should, but I'm not going to do it in this class. We just don't have the time, and I don't see the utility in really like making, like, re-traumatizing you from SOS 210, because I feel like everybody is traumatized, and the second, you all relaxed like noticeably when I said that. So yeah, I mean, no stats. We'll talk about, you know, quantitative research and what it looks like a little bit, but we won't actually make you run any stats, which I'm sure you're all happy about. Yeah, please.
Sorry, I don't know if I misunderstood you, but did you say the labs are like off and on weekly?
Yeah, so maybe I should just pull up the syllabus quickly. Oops, wrong one. Don't worry, I'm not quitting. I'm applying for my own job again. It's super fun. It's because the university has processes. Okay, let's pull up the syllabus. I'll just show you. And this is, I will say, very tentative. I should have put it in the slides. I think this is not fully updated because I think I moved one of these already. Which is weird that it didn't. My computer's been having trouble with updating OneDrive, so this might be an older version of the file. Yes, okay. The Word one is correct. Yeah, so basically kind of how I have it set right now. No lab this week. Next week you do designing research questions. No lab the following, sorry, I should make that bigger. I can see it clearly. You have the university's old fuzzy projectors. So no lab after that. Then research design and ethics, no lab. Oops, there should be a separation line there. Sorry. The 13th, you have, is 13th Family Day? I think the 20th. No, I think it's the 20th. You just can't see the line because the projector doesn't look good. The 19th, yeah. Okay, sorry. There is a line there on mine. You just can't see it because it showed up very faintly on here. The 13th is surveys, and then the 20th, there's no lab because it's reading week. And then the 27th, I'll just have drop-in, and you can come by, and if you have questions about your major lab, you can come by and kind of run it by me. And yeah, and then again, we start with qualitative research questions, break, interviews, break, mixed methods, and drop-in. So basically we have 8 scheduled sessions. 2 of them are drop-ins for extra help. Does that answer?
Yes, follow-up question.
Yeah, of course.
So the days that we don't have a lab, do we just do normal class? Like, do we come here, or is there just no?
There's nothing. No, you're free.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, no, you grab your William Wallace sword and you shout freedom, and go. The time is yours, right?
Okay, cool.
You don't have any requirements from this class, so.
Oh, sick.
So yes, you have this less burdensome than you were once told. Yay! Any other questions? And I think that's up on eClass. I think I updated it. If not, I'll make sure I update it with the updated schedule for you. And this may shift around. Like, this is like, in theory, I've covered enough so that you can cover these topics in the lab. So you've gotten the lecture, and then you go to the lab with Joe. If I'm not quite there, I might, there's not a lot of flex in this, but I might delay stuff by a week. For instance, if we haven't covered enough here, you might have 2 weeks back to back, but I'll make sure to give you lots of note. I won't be like the morning of, I'll be like, your lab is canceled. It's currently 8:45 and you're already on campus. Too bad, suckers. I'll make sure I let you know well in advance that it's not, like the day before when we do this class. So just, I try to respect your time. Okay. How are we doing? Okay? You feel confident? Should I check bear tracks to see how many people have dropped the class while I was talking and are just hanging out here because they're too polite to leave? I'm kidding. Sorry. I'm at heart a joker, and I try to be funny as much as possible. Oh, any questions? I should have gone to there. Okay. I know it's the arts tradition that the first day we don't cover any material. Because this class is only twice a week, it's more of like a Tuesday, Thursday type class. So I'm sorry, I don't know who you are. I heard you talking to the person you were with beforehand. You're like, this probably won't take very long. I apologize. I'm going to jump in and start on the material because there's so few classes in the semester that I just can't do it. All right, so the first one is this one, which is doing social research. And we'll run, maybe not the full time. I know it's early days. And you're like, why do we have to learn on the first day? But we're going to. Okay, so we're going to start talking, a little bit about some basics of social research before we let you go for today. Okay. So, obviously, I think most of you are probably most familiar with the sort of idea that when you go into doing research, right, you come in with a theory, right, with an idea of what you are ultimately going to find. Now, that's not necessarily always the case, right, but a lot of times this is kind of what we think about, right? Okay, so what is a theory, right? Basically, an explanation of observed regularities and patterns, right? It is a way of making sense of data, right? How do you use things that have been observed in the world to sort of explain either particular phenomenon, if you're looking at, something that's very kind of middle range, or, the whole social world, if you're talking about something that is more kind of a grand theory. So, what are common components of a theory? Definitions, right? So what are your key terms, right? So what is it that you are looking at? What are you trying to explain? What if you're studying youth and social media or the effects of, social media on youth mental health, how are you defining youth? How are you defining mental health, right? What are your, key ways of understanding these things? Descriptions. What are particular characteristics of what you're studying? Are you studying, certain age ranges, certain groups of people? What are their kind of particular characteristics? Okay, and then relational statements, how are variables, especially if you're talking about quantitative research, how are variables related? And are they related in a deterministic sense? So they're, you have a really solid connection between them where one is definitely causing the other, or is it more probabilistic? It's like probably, this is how these two are related. Okay, we don't have to hang up on those too much. So, middle range theories. So there's basically two kinds of theories in sociology and in most of the social sciences. Middle range theories and grand theories. So grand theories are going to be the ones that you learned in SOC 100, right? So when you went through in SOC 100, especially if you took it with me, but I think if you took it with anybody, right, you remember the whole course is structured around Marx, Durkheim, Weber, right? You've got conflict theory, you've got functionalism, and you've got symbolic interactionism. You can throw feminism, queer theory, postmodernism into these kinds of mixes. These are kind of what are called grand theories, right? They're meant to kind of give a general explanation of the whole social world, right? Rather than a specific phenomenon within it, it's like, a grand theory would be something like Marx's contention that, all of human history is essentially explained by the history of class conflict, right? Economic conflict between the classes. So that's the kind of Marxian grand theory of the world, right? Everything is economics, everything is material. It explains all the social world is explained by, different classes competing for things, right? So they generally are pretty abstract and provide a sort of general way of looking at the world. Now, the chance that you're going to, for some reason, that eraser on the floor and people walking by keeps making me think there's a mouse coming in the room. And there's like a shadow that moves across and there's a black thing there. So I feel like there's rodents in here, but I'm okay. It's like in my peripheral vision that's bothering me. So, most of you are probably going to, if you engage with grand theories, they're generally a sort of overview way of kind of framing your study, right? That you're more of, say, coming from a Marxist or conflict theory perspective, looking at a specific issue. The chance that you're going to generate grand theories is, maybe you're the next Foucault or Marx or Durkheim, I don't know, probably pretty low. You tend to kind of use grand theories in social research to sort of frame your overall project, right? Middle range theories are more grounded, right? They tend to be more limited in scope, and they are basically typically ways of trying to explain particular phenomena, right? Particular things about the social world. They tend to be testable, right? They're based on specific data sets that you can then sort of test, especially when you're talking about quantitative research. You can test whether the proposition is true or untrue, whether there's a correlation between variables, these sorts of things. So you can think of, in terms of like a middle range theory, there's tons of them, but think of Durkheim's theory of suicide, right? If you remember back, hopefully, I guess you've probably all taken classical social theory as well. Durkheim's theory of suicide is looking at that specific kind of phenomena of suicide, and trying to explain who commits suicide and what their social characteristics are, right? That's more of a middle range theory because he's not trying to explain the whole of society, just that specific phenomenon. But everywhere you look in social science, right, you are gonna, like Merton's theory of anomie, strain theory, right? If you've done any criminology, right, Merton's strain theory where he's got people split up into those quadrants with the rebels down in the corner, right? Those are all kind of specific phenomena meant to explain particular parts of the social world. Now, this is much more typical. Like, if you are working on a research project, much more likely that what you're going to generate at the end of it is a sort of middle range theory, right? You're going to say, okay, I have this phenomena I have observed. This is why I think it's happening, right? This is why, I don't know, if you're doing a study of American TV shows and you're wanting to understand why certain shows get made or not, your middle range theory would be, something like, I think police shows get produced more often because, the viewership statistics are higher. It appeals to kind of a law and order thing or whatever your theory happens to be, that would be your kind of middle range theory, right? Does that make sense? So far, so good? I know it's 2 slides in. Hopefully you're not lost. Okay, so what's the relationship between theory and research? Okay, so hopefully kind of obviously, right? Theory can guide research and often does, right? Especially kind of grand theories will tend to guide the sort of research that people do, right? Other people's middle range theories, like you may have found a middle range theory related to some phenomenon that you are interested in and you want to test it, right? So that can guide your research as well, right? And research can test theories, right? So especially when you're talking about sort of quantitative research, you can test the sort of proposition you think, what you think is going on using data, right? So there can be this back and forth process. Quantitative and qualitative are a little bit different when you talk about, how you go from theory, like data to theory or theory to data, and I'll talk about that in a sec. But there's always this kind of back and forth, right? Theories can guide research and research can test theories as well. Okay, so there's 2 main approaches that we tend to see in social science with regards to basically how you approach social research and how you come to your conclusions. There's deductive methods and inductive methods, right? You can't see it. Again, I can see it really well on my screen. You can't see it. So deductive is over here. Inductive is over here. And I don't know, they've got an example of like Dexter and Dr. House from different TV shows. But basically, there's just different approaches to how you go about kind of understanding the world, right? The deductive method, right, this is really the most common in quantitative research, so the research that has to do with numbers, right? And because, quantitative research, things like working with surveys or existing data sets is probably the largest segment of social research. It is the most common approach in social research. And generally, deductive research, they always put me on construction sites. This morning in sociology of youth, it was like someone was drilling into a wall directly behind my head. It was awesome. It was not disruptive at all. So generally, deductive research, you start with a theory, right? So you start with a theory. So you come up with, kind of your general sense of what you think is going on. You try to understand a specific phenomenon through background research, right? So generally this would be like some kind of literature review, right? So you would basically check what other people have done regarding a similar kind of phenomenon that you're interested in. You then develop a hypothesis, right? So let's say that you want to test, I don't know, something, let me think of something silly here. You want to understand what, the voting patterns of Mormons in Lethbridge, Alberta, and how it's related to their religious service attendance, right? You could come up with, you would find a bunch of theories, right? There are a bunch of kind of sociological and political theories that speak to, in this case, probably middle range theories that speak to, voting patterns of religious groups and how they function. So you come up with your hypothesis that, Mormons who attend religious services weekly or more are likely to vote for, the People's Party of Canada in a higher percentage, or whatever you want to come up with. Okay, so you develop a theory, and then basically you test it with empirical data, right? So this can be done in a couple of ways, right? Either you can go to existing data sets, right? So you could go to research someone else has done and a big data set that you can download and do analysis on, or you can go and do your own research, right? In this case, probably some kind of survey research of Mormons in Lethbridge, Alberta, to try and figure out what their voting patterns ultimately look like. And then you basically test it, right? Does religious service attendance, your independent variable in this case, is there a correlation to voting behavior, your dependent variable in this case? And then if your theory is correct or your hypothesis is correct, you got it, or you might have to revise your hypothesis. And if you ever look at kind of quantitative research papers, right, they'll often go through, they have got their data set and they've got H1, right? This is my first hypothesis about the data and I'm going to test it, H2 and usually H3, right? And they'll kind of go through these different hypotheses, test them based on the data, and then in the discussion section, they'll be like, okay, I need to revise this hypothesis because this turned out not to be true, or there was a weak correlation here, and this is kind of how you do a deductive method. But the important thing, do I have this on the next slide? Yes. The really important thing to kind of remember is that deductive reasoning and deductive research starts from theory and moves through to data collection, right? You don't start with data collection, you start with theory, hypothesis, then you kind of either collect your data or use someone else's data, and then, check the data, and either your hypothesis is confirmed or rejected, and then you revise, right? But it starts theory, hypothesis, data, right? So that's deductive. Okay. Okay, so inductive methods basically start with, oh, sorry, Emma.
Sorry, is
Do I need to go back?
on the left or the right side of that?
This one? So yeah, this side is deductive, this side is inductive. Yeah, I should redo the graphic. Should polish it up for them. I just pulled it off Google image search at some point. Yeah, so inductive methods are a little bit different, right? Theories and interpretations are the outcome of, that should say research, out of data, right? So basically with inductive methods, what you do is you gather data first, right? So you would typically in an inductive method, rather than starting with a hypothesis, you just identify a social phenomenon that you're interested in, and you start doing, and you probably come up with some kind of research question, and then you just start gathering data without necessarily having a hypothesis, right? Or having a theory, right? You basically then go from the data and you make observations about the data. We'll talk about this in great detail way later in the course, but you basically, after you've gathered the data, you try to understand it and develop a theory of what's going on from the data. There's a couple of different methods of doing this, right? Or a couple of different approaches to this. One of them is called analytic induction, and the other one is called grounded theory. Grounded theory in qualitative research is by far the most common one. And basically, why is it grounded? Because it's grounded in data, right? So it's grounded in the data that you are collecting, rather than testing a theory with data. The theory is grounded in particular forms of data. So, like I said, we'll talk about this way later in the course. Grounded theory is really commonly used in qualitative research. But, for our purposes here, you just have to know inductive, you go from data to theory. Deductive, you go from theory to data, right? So you're kind of following along different paths. Okay. Sorry, does that make sense? Before I move on, I need to remind myself to ask you if you have questions. Okay. Right, so this handy little chart from the textbook. Deductive is theory to observations and findings. Inductive is observation and findings to theory, right? So they're kind of reversed in this sense. Okay. So when it comes to our two big ways of kind of doing research, either through numbers, quantitative, or essentially more through kind of people's experiences of the social world, qualitative. There are some questions of what's called epistemology that go into this. And it's basically, when we talk about epistemology, basically epistemology is how do we know what we know about the world, right? And how do you acquire information about the world? How can you learn about the world you live in? And there's essentially, for our purposes, three broad positions on how you can understand the world, which is positivism, interpretivism, and sort of critical approaches. All right. So positivism essentially is following the methodology of the natural sciences, right? So the natural sciences have this notion of what they call empiricism, or what's called empiricism, right? The use of senses to gain knowledge about the world, right? So you know this from, you've probably been looking at this since elementary school, right? In terms of your science classes, that science makes observations about the world and comes to its conclusions from those observations, right? And so basically this is what is called positivism, right? And the assumption in positivism is essentially that the only way we can know the world is through direct observation, right? And especially through observations that are seen as objective, right? That are using tool sets that are objective rather than subjective, right? So it's not about your perception of the world, but it should be about the world as it actually is. And that's the sort of positivism and empiricism in a nutshell, right? It's about empirical observations, not about people's perceptions. Okay, so positivism, generally you basically generate hypotheses, you gather information about the world in the most objective way that you can, and then basically use that data to test your hypothesis. And it comes with a couple of, I think, I guess this point's always a little maybe confusing. In some senses, positivism it's not only deductive, right? You can have, inductive kind of research that's positivist as well, but let's just leave that to one side for the moment. Typically, right, when you're talking about empiricism or positivism, you're more talking about kind of quantitative research and deductive kind of reasoning. Okay. It has a couple of assumptions which are probably a little bit problematic, right? The idea that science is value-free, right? That science and the tool sets that are associated with science ultimately, are value-free because they are so objective, right? Because they are not based on anyone's subjective understanding of the world, because you're making direct observations of the world, people's values can't come into them quite as much. So formerly people talked about this as objectivity. Now the term that gets bandied about a little bit more is intersubjectivity, right? So no matter who you are, you should get the same results. Like between two different subjects or multiple different subjects, people should see the same things because they're making, fully empirical observations about the world. And in positivism, scientific statements are of key importance, right? Because ultimately it is so concerned with getting the world right in terms of its understanding of it as sort of objective or intersubjective. Okay. My throat is getting very dry. I think possibly scheduling 4 classes on the same day was a mistake. All right. Interpretivism, this is probably, pretty well understood if you've ever, kind of been around and read sociological research. But basically, interpretivism is a critique of positivism in a lot of ways, right? Especially in understanding the social world. And it's more typical of qualitative research, right? Of research that's interested in people's experiences. And the goal is, of an interpretivist approach is not to get an objective kind of look at the world. People who use an interpretivist kind of framework probably question whether an objective, positivist kind of view of the world is even possible, right? So you see this a lot, say, in the kind of thinking of Foucault and Derrida and these sorts of people, the goal basically is to grasp how people are making meaning in their lives, right? How do people understand their own social worlds through their own lenses, right? And so it has a couple of its own kind of assumptions, right? Basically, one of them, and you can find this, say, particularly in the works of someone like Peter Berger, that basically people are constructing the social world out of their own experiences, right? That people interpret reality, the reality of their own lives, and they're constructing that reality over and over again. Now, it's typically not quite that simple, right? Someone like Peter Berger, and he wrote Social Construction of Reality, would suggest that, you're shaped by the society you live in, but your own interpretations of your experience then go on to reshape that society over time. And not just you as a person, but the whole kind of plural you of the society, right? So it's this kind of two-step, right? You're shaped by your society, but then your own kind of lived experiences reshape that society as you construct the meaning of your own lives, right? Okay, so basically, interpretivist frameworks are there to try and get at how people understand their own lives and how they're constructing their own realities, right? How their interpretations of the world lead to their actions, for example, or their understandings of the world in all sorts of ways, right? Okay. So they tend to want to view the social world from the point of view of the social actor, right? So in this case, right, if I want to understand the experience of, say, let's take a group. Let's say white, bald college professors. What would you do, right, is you would go and talk to white, bald college professors and ask them about how they understand their place in the world, right? How is it that they, do they feel job satisfaction? Do they, wish they'd been a pastry chef? All these sorts of things you would ask about how they're constructing their own reality, rather than, say, doing a survey and trying to get objective data about, 1,000 or 6,000 professors, right? You're wanting to get maybe 20 people and see how are these people understanding their own lives, right? So you're after, what's called an empathic understanding, trying to see things through their eyes, right? Trying to understand how they see the world, and their interpretation of existence, right? You're trying to see how people build their own understanding of the world. Okay. Yeah, probably the most prominent approach to this is symbolic interactionism, which again, you've been learning about since SOC 100, right? This perspective that views agents in society as ultimately playing a role in interpreting, the symbols and the realities that they're in, and coming up with their own sorts of interpretations, which then go on to shape the world, right? And again, like the kind of sub-branch of that is social construction, which you find in the work of people like Peter Berger. So this idea, anytime you hear, that some social phenomenon is socially constructed, gender is socially constructed, gender roles are socially constructed, you're essentially kind of stepping into this realm of a kind of interpretivist framework that says none of these things are given realities, right? There's nothing given about the fact that, women wear dresses or will wear their hair long. These are all kind of social constructions of this concept we call gender or gender roles, right? This is the kind of world you're getting into. It's an interpretivist framework which says it's people's understanding of the world that then goes out and shapes the world. Sorry, does that kind of make sense? All right. Okay, and the last one, and maybe we'll leave you off after critical theories, is critical approaches to social science. Critical theories, right? So these tend to be your kind of Marxist-Marxian kind of offshoots. All of the conflict theories and critical theories are all these sorts of ways of understanding the world. And basically, they themselves, in a lot of ways, are critiques of positivism as well. Now, critical theories are, I think, a little bit more, I don't want to say not less rigorous, but less tied to particular ways of seeing the world and particular approaches. They can use both deductive and inductive approaches, quantitative and qualitative research. But they tend to, one of the really kind of important points is they reject the notion of science as value-free, right? Most critical theorists will say that science is imbued with all sorts of the meanings that you would tend to find in just about any other part of society, right? So they would be, you might say critical race theorists might view science as imbued with a European or white ethos, right? One that privileges certain ways of knowing, say European ways of knowing over indigenous ways of knowing, right? And that to say science is value-free is itself a sort of value claim saying this is better than the other, right? And so these are the kinds of things that critical theorists would tend to go with. There's also this sort of, I guess, praxis or activist kind of framework in a lot of critical approaches to social science, which is, in this anti-oppressive kind of view of the world. Right, so they view, society as, in a lot of ways, split between different groups that are potentially oppressive and those that are oppressed, with the idea that social research should have some role in breaking down these patterns of oppression, right? That it should be involved in changing the world, hopefully for the better. Okay, do you want to do, no, why don't we leave it after, we'll pick up on ontological considerations on Wednesday? We'll go through the full time on Wednesday. But yeah, we'll leave it there. I won't burn you. And I promise this gets a lot more grounded. Probably in about an hour after this. All right, so we will see you on Wednesday. If you have any questions, you can come talk to me after class, or you can shoot me an email or whatever you like. It is really hot in here. Holy moly.